Hey, I'm Kay. Welcome to Kay's Chit-Chat, where your quiet thoughts become stories and your stories might help someone else feel less alone. The gift. The dinner table had a white tablecloth and the silver forks shined under the fancy French lights. David looked around the living room. It was neat. It was clean. It looked like a catalog page that Claire had spent all day setting up. There were gold-colored balloons tied to the chairs, a chocolate cake in the middle of the table, and the two kids sat across from him with smiles they'd put on a while ago. "Happy birthday, Dad." Ethan pushed a homemade card toward him. David opened it and saw messy crayon writing and a drawing of a man with glasses standing next to a building, probably his office. He smiled and ruffled his son's hair. "Thanks, buddy." Mia didn't say anything. She just put a beaded bracelet on the table. It was made of blue and white beads strung on an elastic band. David realized he stared at it a little too long before putting it on his wrist. "I love it," he said. Mia nodded and went back to eating her cake. Claire stood up from the end of the table. She was holding a small, dark blue box with a white ribbon tied around it. She came over to him, put it in front of him, and sat down in the chair next to him, her arm touching his. "My gift to you." David untied the ribbon. He took off the wrapping paper. He opened the box. Inside was an Omega watch. The face was dark blue, almost black, and the band was brown leather. He knew it. He'd looked at it in the store a month ago when they were buying Ethan's shoes, and he'd glanced at the price tag before walking out. "Claire, do you like it?" She looked at him, her blue eyes waiting. "I love it." David put it on his left wrist and felt the cool glass against his skin. "But you didn't have to." "I wanted to," she cut him off, her voice soft but firm. "You deserve it." The kids clapped. Ethan yelled, "Let me see!" and ran around the table to look at the watch. Mia looked up too, but her eyes stopped somewhere between the table and her dad, and then she looked back down. David felt something in his chest, not happy, not unhappy. It was like when he stood in front of the office elevator on a Monday morning, waiting for the doors to open, knowing that behind them was a day full of numbers and expectations. He took a sip of wine. After dinner, the kids went to bed. Claire cleared the table, and David stood by the sink drying the plates she handed him. The water ran, the dishes clinked, and the kitchen light gave off a warm glow. She washed, he dried. The rhythm was so familiar, they didn't need to talk. "Did you have a good day?" Claire asked without turning around. "Yeah. You seem a little tired." "It's just work." She turned off the water, dried her hands on the gray towel hanging on the oven handle, and then turned to look at him. The light from the cabinet gave her face a soft yellow glow, making her features look gentle. She came close and put her hand on his chest. "Leave work at work," and she said, "Today is your day." David leaned down and kissed her. Her lips were soft, tasting like wine. But when he started to pull away, her hand grabbed the back of his neck and kept him there. "Let me take care of the rest," she whispered. Upstairs in the bedroom, Claire closed the door. She pulled him onto the bed, and David let himself be pulled. He was used to this. The way she started, the way she led, the way she always knew exactly what she wanted. In the dark, her hands moved over him. Her lips found the spots that made him hold his breath. "I told you," she whispered in his ear. "Hon, I'm the real gift." Her body was warm, and David responded. His hands went to her waist and pulled her closer. He knew what she wanted. She always wanted him on top, wanted him in control, but also wanted him to get so caught up that he lost control. And he did. He did what he knew she liked. The touches, the rhythm, the way he said her name when their breathing got heavy. Claire moaned, her nails dug into his back, and David felt a strange separation inside his own body. Part of him was there, moving, reacting, doing what needed to be done. Another part of him was standing outside, watching the scene with a quiet kind of emptiness. She always did this. After Claire finished, David kept going for a few more minutes because he knew she liked that. The feeling of it being stretched out, of staying in that moment longer than necessary. When he stopped, she lay next to him, breathing hard, her hand still holding his neck. "See," she said, her voice just loud enough to hear in the dark, "I still want you." David didn't say anything. He just put his hand on her hair and smoothed down the tangled strands. She still wanted him. That phrase made him wonder, was there ever a time when she didn't want him? And if there was, when was it? But he didn't ask. He just lay there, listening to her breathing slowly return to normal. Around 3 a.m, David woke up. He didn't know what woke him. Maybe a car in the distance. Maybe the silence that was too deep after dreams he couldn't remember. He lay still, eyes open in the dark, feeling the heaviness in his shoulders and the cold metal of the watch on his wrist. He still hadn't taken it off. Next to him, Claire was lying on her side facing him. one hand resting on his chest, her usual sleeping position. Her hair was spread across the pillow, her lips slightly open, her breathing steady. She was beautiful. She was always beautiful, even in the dark. Even after a night like this, David looked at her. In his head, a question kept repeating, like a loop with no way out. Did she do this because she wanted him, or because she needed to prove something? He remembered all the times she seduced him. Not just tonight, not just on special occasions, but anytime she felt distance. After fights, after he came home late, after she went to a party with friends and saw them with things she didn't have. She always came back and she always wanted him. But there was a difference David couldn't name, something in the way she looked at him when they had sex, not looking but checking, like she was testing to see if he was still there, still wanted her, still needed her. And David, in those moments, always gave the right answer. He turned his head to look at the ceiling. The room was so dark he could barely see where the walls ended and the ceiling began. He heard the air conditioner blowing, tree branches brushing against the window, Claire's steady breathing. He thought back to the early days, the days when this question didn't exist. When she came to him just because she wanted to, and he took her just because who wanted to, and neither of them had to prove anything. But now, David looked at the watch on his wrist. Its face was dark, not glowing in the darkness. He didn't need to see it to know it was there. He felt its presence, heavy, cold, a perfect fit, a birthday gift, a reassurance, a test. He didn't know anymore. Claire stirred in her sleep, her hand squeezing lightly on his chest, like even while sleeping, she needed to know he was still there. David closed his eyes. But the question was still there, floating in the darkness between him and the ceiling, with no answer, just a loop that never ended. Outside the window, a car drove by, headlights flashing across the curtain and then disappearing. The room sank back into darkness. David opened his eyes again. He didn't know what he was waiting for. An answer, a change, a sign that he had misunderstood everything. But nothing came. Just Claire next to him. Just the watch on his wrist. Just the silence of an upscale suburban house at 3 a.m. And a question he was afraid to ask her, and couldn't even ask himself. He looked at her one more time. Did she do this because she wanted him, or because she needed to prove something? And David knew that tomorrow, when Claire woke up, she would look at him with the eyes of the woman who gave him everything on his birthday night, and he would look back at her with the smile he had learned to make after 13 years of marriage. He wouldn't ask. He would never ask. Because part of him was scared of the answer, and another part of him had already known the answer for a very long time. The standard. The first time David said no was on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after his birthday. He got home at 8 after a day of 3 meetings back-to-back and a contract that almost fell apart because of a mistake in a spreadsheet. In the car, he had sat for an extra 15 minutes after turning off the engine, looking through the windshield at the house. The kitchen light was still on, Claire's shadow moving behind the curtain. When he walked in, she was sitting on the couch watching some show, her laptop open on her lap, a glass of wine on the table. "I waited for you for dinner," she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "I ate at the office, leftovers from a meeting." Claire closed her laptop, put it aside, and stood up. She came over to him, putting her hand on his chest like it was a habit. "Go take a shower," she said. "I'll wait." David knew what that meant. He stood in the bathroom under the hot water longer than usual, letting steam rise around him, letting the tightness in his shoulders ease. When he came out, Claire was already in bed, the amber nightlight on, wearing the black nightgown he used to like. "I'm tired, Shay," he said, standing in the doorway, a towel over his shoulder. She looked at him. Her eyes moved from his face down to his chest, down to his hand holding the towel, then back up to his eyes. "Just for a little bit," she said. "I know you're tired." David shook his head. "Oh, not tonight." He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, feeling the air in the room change. It was a different kind of silence, heavier, with an invisible pressure. Claire sat up, leaning back against the headboard. She looked at him for a few more seconds, and David saw something move across her face. Not anger, not sadness. Something like disappointment. A door closing right before she could step through it. "You don't find me attractive anymore?" The question landed in the space between them, quiet in a scary way, like she was just asking if he wanted more coffee. David felt his stomach clench. "You know that's not true." "Then what is it?" "I'm just tired." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on him, and David knew his answer wasn't enough. He went to the bed, sat on the edge, and put his hand on her leg over the thin blanket. "You're beautiful," he said. "I just need one night off." Claire looked at his hand on her leg. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond. After a moment, she said, "Okay." She turned off the nightlight. In the dark, David lay down next to her, leaving more space between them than usual. He heard her breathing, uneven, and he knew she wasn't asleep. He wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. And the silence stretched until it became something you could almost touch. About half an hour later, Claire turned over, her back to him. David lay staring at the ceiling, wondering, had he ever asked her the opposite question? Had he ever said, "You don't find me attractive anymore?" And would the answer even matter? The second time, David didn't say no. It was 4 days later on Sunday night. The kids had been asleep since 9. Claire took a shower, and when she came out with her hair still damp, the smell of lavender soap coming off her skin, David was sitting at the desk in their bedroom with his laptop open, checking emails. She stood behind him and put her hands on his shoulders. "Close the laptop," she said. David looked at the screen. An email from his boss, subject line in bold, needed a reply by morning. He looked at the watch on his wrist. 11:15. "I just need 5 minutes." "Close it," she said again, her voice not louder, but with a finality that made David close the laptop. He turned around. Claire sat on his lap, her arms around his neck, her lips finding his. And David responded. He put his hands on her waist and pulled her closer, and he did what needed to be done. When they were done, Claire lay on his chest, breathing softly. "I don't want you to think I don't want you," she whispered. David didn't say anything. He just put his hand on her hair and stroked it gently. He didn't think she didn't want him. He was thinking about something else. Did he just do this because he wanted her, or because he didn't want to hear that question again? He wasn't sure. In the weeks that followed, David started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. One Friday night, after the kids watched a movie and went to bed, Claire stayed in the living room with him, her hand on his thigh as they sat on the couch. She didn't say anything, just sat there, her finger drawing little circles on his knee without thinking. David looked at the clock, 11:20. She didn't usually stay to watch TV with him after 11. One Tuesday night, he got home at 7, and Claire was in the kitchen wearing a dress he'd never seen before. Not a nightgown, but not work clothes either. She turned around when he walked in and smiled. "I left work early today," she said, and stopped by Target and saw this. David looked at her. Short dress, dark blue, neckline lower than what she usually wore out. He didn't say anything, just put his bag down and went over to her. That night, after the kids were asleep, Claire pulled him upstairs to the bedroom, and David started to notice. She usually made her moves at certain times. It wasn't random, it wasn't impulsive. There was a structure, a rhythm. Friday nights after the kids went to bed, Tuesday nights when there were no evening meetings, Sunday nights before the new week started. And if one of those times was missed for some reason, she'd make up for it another day, usually Thursday. David wondered if he was imagining it. But then, one Thursday night when he got home at 9 after a long day and just wanted to sleep, he found Claire already in bed, the nightlight on, a book on her chest. She looked at him when he walked in. "You're home." "Yeah." He changed, brushed his teeth, washed his face. When he came out of the bathroom, she had put her book down and was watching him. "Come to bed," she said. David lay down next to her, and in the dark, she turned toward him, her hand on his chest. "I missed you," she whispered. And David did what needed to be done. A week later, sitting in his office, staring at a screen full of numbers, David realized something else. She almost never said no. He leaned back in his chair, his hands on the keyboard, and let that thought settle. Over all those years, he could count on one hand the times Claire had said no. And every time she said no, there was a clear reason. She was tired, she was sick, she had a deadline the next morning. But for him, it was different. He could be tired, sick, having the worst day of the year, and his answer was always yes. Because saying no, as he'd learned on that Wednesday 3 weeks ago, wasn't just an answer. It was a different question. A question he didn't have the energy to answer. David looked out the window, down at the company parking lot where cars were lined up neatly in the afternoon sun. He thought about Claire. About the way she looked at him when he said no. About the disappointment on her face, like he'd just taken away something she needed. And he thought, does she ever ask if I need anything? He couldn't remember the last time she asked what he wanted. Not about sex. She asked if he wanted her, if he found her attractive, if he still loved her. But she never asked, do you want to do this tonight? Are you feeling okay? Do you need to be held instead? David closed his laptop. He looked at the watch on his wrist, the birthday gift, the Omega with the dark blue face. It was still running perfectly. It was still beautiful. It was still something he would never have bought for himself. If he said no tonight, would she ask that question again? And he already knew the answer. That night when he got home, David noticed Claire wearing a dark blue dress. Not the old one, a new one, teal, tight on her body. She was cooking in the kitchen, and when he walked in, she turned around and smiled. "I left early today," and she said. "Drove past the mall and saw this at Nordstrom." David put his bag down. He looked at her, at the dress, at how the kitchen light made her shoulders look soft. "Looks good," he said. She smiled, and David saw satisfaction in her eyes, an affirmation, a green light. That night, after the kids were asleep, Claire came up to him while he was sitting at the table, checking email on his phone. She put her hand on his shoulder and leaned down to whisper in his ear, "Let's go upstairs." David looked at his phone screen. No important emails, no reason to say no. And he knew that if he said no, he'd have to deal with that look, that question, that disappointment. He turned off his phone. He stood up and followed her up the stairs. In the dark bedroom with Claire on top of him, her hands gripping his neck, her lips finding his, David closed his eyes and let his body do what it had learned to do. He thought about the watch on his wrist. He thought about Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights. He thought about how she never asked if he wanted to. And he wondered, if he stopped doing this, if one day he said no and stuck with it, what would happen? But he didn't dare find out, because part of him was scared the answer wouldn't be her leaving. It would be her staying and looking at him with eyes he couldn't bear to see. Later, after Claire had fallen asleep, David lay staring at the ceiling. He started counting in his head the days of the week, the times she made a move, the times he said yes, the times he wanted to say no but didn't. He didn't know what he was trying to prove. He just knew that there was something in this house, in this room, in his body, lying next to the woman he loved. Something that was running on rules he'd never agreed to, but had never refused. And he started to wonder, what had he become in this story? A husband? A lover? Or just an answer to a question Claire kept asking every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday night? Next to him, Claire turned in her sleep, her arm wrapping around him, and David felt the warmth from her body. He didn't pull away. He just lay there, staring into the darkness, promising himself that tomorrow he'd think about it. Tomorrow he'd figure out the answer. But he knew tomorrow would come, and he'd do what needed to be done, because that was what he'd learned to do after 13 years. And the question would still be there, waiting for the next Tuesday night: the jealousy. The neighbor's BBQ started at 3 in the afternoon. David stood by the long table in Tom and Karen's backyard, holding a beer, listening to Tom talk about replacing the awning. He nodded, occasionally said, "That sounds like a pain," but his eyes were on the garden, where the kids were playing basketball in the driveway. Karen, Tom's wife, came out of the house with another platter of grilled meat. She set it down and turned to David. "Can I get you another beer?" "I'm good, thanks." Karen didn't leave right away. She stood next to him, looking toward the kids. "Ethan's gotten so tall. When did that happen?" David smiled. "I ask myself the same thing every morning." They talked about the kids' school, the after-school basketball program Ethan was in, Karen's family's upcoming summer trip. Karen was easy to talk to, her voice warm, without the awkwardness as David usually felt at these parties. She looked at him when she talked, her brown eyes not looking away, and David found himself doing the same. He didn't think anything of it. It was just a normal conversation between neighbors. Then he felt Claire's arm slide around his waist. She had come up from behind without a sound, and her hand gripped his hip with just enough force for him to feel each finger through his shirt. "Honey," she said, her voice soft, but with something underneath. "Can you help me with the drinks? I can't carry the cooler by myself." David turned to Karen. "Excuse me." Karen smiled. "Of course." Claire didn't wait for him. She was already walking back toward the house, but her hand held his, pulling him along. David quickened his pace to catch up. Inside, Claire opened the fridge, took out a case of sodas and beers, and put it on the kitchen counter. She didn't say anything. "Do you want me to take this out back?" David asked. "Yeah." He lifted the case, but Claire didn't move. She stood there, her hands on the counter, staring into the open fridge. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine." She closed the fridge, and for a split second before she turned around, David saw her face. Not angry, but her jaw was tight, like she was holding something back. When she turned, the look was gone. She smiled, came up to him, and put her hand on his chest. "I just needed your help." For the rest of the party, Claire stayed close to David. Not in an obvious way. She didn't cling to him or hold his hand, but she was always there. Standing next to him when he talked to Tom about the sprinkler system, sitting beside him when he ate, her hand on his leg when they sat on the patio chairs. To anyone looking, they were just a normal couple, comfortable with each other. But David felt the difference. When he talked to Karen a second time, just thanking her for the salad she brought out, Claire appeared next to him immediately, handing him a bottle of water. "I think you should drink water," she said. "You've been drinking beer all afternoon." David took the bottle. "Thanks." Karen looked at Claire, smiled, then went back inside. And David realized Claire hadn't talked to Karen once during the whole party. She talked to Tom, to the couple next door, to Mia's friend's mom, but not Karen. He wondered if anyone else had noticed. That night when they got home, the kids took showers and went to bed. Claire was quiet the whole time. Not angry quiet, just a different kind of quiet. She helped Mia brush her teeth, read Ethan a story, turned off the lights, and when David stood in the hallway waiting, she walked past him without a word. He followed her into the bedroom. She closed the door, and when he turned around, she was right in front of him, her hands pulling up his shirt, her lips finding his neck. She was stronger than usual, faster, like something was pushing from inside her, and she needed to let it out. Claire, she didn't let him talk. She pushed him to sit on the bed, sat on his lap, and David felt the difference right away. It wasn't the soft seduction of Tuesday and Thursday nights. This was different, something possessive. When she took off her shirt, David saw her eyes, bright but not bright with desire, bright with something else, something he'd seen before, but never named. She leaned down to kiss him, and David responded. His hands went to her back, and she groaned, but it wasn't a groan of pleasure. It was relief, like he had just answered a question she hadn't asked yet. They had sex, and the whole time, David felt like there were two versions of himself. One that was there, his body reacting, his hands moving on her, his lips finding familiar spots. And another version standing to the side, watching the scene, wondering, is she doing this because she wants me? Or because she needs to prove something? Afterward, when Claire lay on his chest, breathing, her hand over his heart like she wanted to feel it beating, she whispered, I love you. David put his hand on her hair. I love you too. He said it because it was true, but he also said it because he didn't know what else to say. That night, David couldn't sleep. Claire lay next to him, her back turned, breathing evenly. He looked at her silhouette in the dark, the curve of her shoulder, her hair spread across the pillow, and he thought about what had happened. She had been jealous. He knew it. He knew it from the way she appeared next to him when he was talking to Karen, from the way she pulled him into the house, from the way she stayed by his side for the rest of the party, from the way she had sex with him tonight. And part of him, a part he was a little ashamed to admit, felt a small satisfaction. She was still jealous. She still wanted him. She still saw him as hers. But the other part of him, the bigger part, the deeper part, the more tired part, felt a heaviness in his chest. Because he realized she wasn't jealous because of him. She was jealous because of her own fear. The fear of losing him. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being replaced. And in that story, he wasn't the lover. He was the prize. Something to be protected, something to be marked, something to prove was still hers. David lay staring at the ceiling. In his head, pieces started falling into place. The nights Claire seduced him after they fought. The nights she was more aggressive after he came back from a business trip. The nights she pulled him to bed after a party where he talked to someone she didn't like. Their intimacy always happened after something that made her jealous. He had never seen it that way before. He always thought it was just Claire. She had a high drive, she loved him, she wanted him. But now, lying in the dark, David started to see a different pattern. A pattern not about love, but about control. He turned his head to look at Claire. She was sleeping peacefully, like everything had been fixed, like the territory had been claimed, like he had been confirmed to still belong to her. David closed his eyes. He tried to remember the last time they had sex for a different reason. Because they were happy, because they missed each other, because it was a nice Sunday morning and they had nothing to do. He tried to remember one time Claire came to him, not after some event, not to answer an unasked question, not to prove something to herself. He couldn't remember, and that was what scared him. The next morning, David went downstairs to make coffee. Claire came down 10 minutes later, wearing a bathrobe, her hair messy. She came up to him, put her hand on his back, and kissed his shoulder. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep. She didn't ask why, she just stood there, her hand still on his back, like she wanted to make sure he was still there. Did you have fun last night? She asked. David poured coffee into a mug. Yeah. I like parties at Tom's. The food is always good. Yeah. She took her hand off his back and went to the fridge to get milk. And David stood there watching her, wondering if she knew that he had seen it. That moment in Tom's kitchen, when she closed the fridge and her face was tight before she turned around. That moment she looked at Karen with eyes that weren't hostile, but something deeper. Fear. Did she know he saw it? And if she did she care? Claire turned back, holding the milk carton, and smiled at him. A beautiful smile, warm, like nothing had happened last night. Like she hadn't been trying to mark her territory, like he wasn't something that needed to be protected. David smiled back, because that's what he had learned to do. Want some coffee? He asked. Yes, can you make me some? Yeah. He turned to make her coffee, and when she took the mug from his hand, her fingers touched his, and she looked at him with eyes he'd seen 1,000 times before. The eyes of a woman who wanted to be loved, wanted to be reassured, wanted to be sure she was still the only one. David looked back at her, and he wondered, if he was the prize, then who was the winner? Because more and more, he didn't feel like the winner. The first crack. It was a Thursday night. David knew because Thursday night was always one of the nights Claire made a move. He had figured that out weeks ago. The hidden rhythm, the schedule no one ever talked about, but everyone followed. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, sometimes an extra day if one of those got missed. This Thursday night was no different from other Thursday nights. The kids were asleep. Claire took a shower. She came out with her hair still damp, wearing her gray nightgown, and came over to him while he was sitting on the bed, phone in hand. "Turn it off," she said. David turned off his phone, put it on the nightstand. She sat on his lap, and David felt the weight of her body, the warmth of her skin after the shower. Her arms went around his neck, her lips found his, and he kissed her back. But right from the start, David felt something was different. Not her. She was the same as always, gentle but in charge, slow but purposeful. The difference was in him, a tiredness that wasn't in his muscles or his bones, but somewhere deeper, somewhere he didn't have a name for. He tried to focus. His hands moved on her back, his lips kissed hers. He knew how to do this. He had done this hundreds of times, but his body didn't respond. David felt worry start to creep into him, like a rope tightening around his chest. He tried not to think about it. He thought about other things, the smell of soap on Claire's skin, the little sound she made when he kissed her neck, how she held him tighter when he did something she liked. But the more he tried not to think about it, the more he thought about it, and his body still didn't respond. Claire noticed before he could figure out how to hide it. She stopped, sitting up straight on his lap, her eyes looking down, then up at his face. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah," David said. "It's just..." He didn't know what to say. Just what? Just that he was tired? He'd said that lots of times before, and it had never been a problem. Just that he didn't want to? He'd never thought of it that way, just he didn't know. Claire didn't wait for him to find an answer. She leaned down to kiss him again, her hands moving over him, trying to spark something. And David wanted to respond. He wanted his body to do what it had done hundreds of times before, easily, automatically. But it didn't. He felt panic start to rise in his throat. Claire stopped again. She looked at him, and for a second so short it might have been his imagination, David saw something flash in her eyes. Not anger, not sadness. Disappointment. It came and went so fast that if he hadn't been looking right at her in that moment, he would have missed it. But he saw it. And it stayed inside him like a piece of broken glass, sharp, impossible to remove. Then Claire smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. "It's okay," she said. "You're just tired. It's fine." She lay down next to him, pulled his hand onto her waist, and pressed her back against him. A familiar, comforting move, like she was saying everything was still okay. But David didn't feel okay. He lay there, his hand on Claire's waist, feeling the warmth of her body, and a question started to form in his mind, like a drip that wouldn't stop. Was she afraid of losing him, or afraid of losing this? He used to think they were the same thing. But now, lying in the dark with the shards of that moment of disappointment still in her eyes, David started to see the difference. Losing him, losing this. Two different things. And he didn't know which one she was more scared of. Claire fell asleep about 15 minutes later. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed in his arms. But David didn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the silence of the room, the heaviness in his chest. He thought about what had happened, about how his body hadn't responded, about the flash of disappointment in Claire's eyes, and about the fear that had started to grow in him right after. He was scared it would happen again. He was scared that if it happened again, that look wouldn't just flash by. He was scared that one day, Claire would look at him with eyes he couldn't handle, the eyes of a woman who didn't want him anymore, didn't need him anymore, didn't see him as enough anymore. He was scared that if he couldn't do this, he wouldn't be the man in her eyes anymore. He was scared that everything he had built, 13 years, the house, the kids, this life, was built on a foundation more fragile than he thought. And that fear, David realized, didn't come from Claire. It came from him. From the way he measured his worth by his ability to meet expectations. From the way he always thought that if he did good enough, did enough, was perfect enough, everything would be okay. From the way he had never learned to exist without being validated. He looked at Claire. She was sleeping, her face turned toward him, her lips slightly open, her hair on the pillow. She was beautiful. She was still beautiful, and he loved her. That had never changed. But was loving her enough? If he couldn't do this, would she still stay? And if she stayed, would he still be himself in her eyes? David closed his eyes, trying to find an answer in the darkness. But there was no answer. Just a new, unfamiliar feeling growing inside him. A feeling he had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of work or money or things he could control, but a deeper, hazier, more haunting fear. The fear that he wasn't enough, that he would never be enough, that all those years of trying to be the man Claire needed had not prepared him for this, his own body failing him. The next morning, David woke up before Claire. He lay still for a while, feeling the gray light come through the curtains, listening to the birds in the backyard. His body still felt heavy, but not the heaviness of a sleepless night. It was the heaviness of something that had changed inside him, and he didn't know how to change it back. He got out of bed quietly, went downstairs to make coffee. While the coffee maker ran, he stood looking out the window at the backyard, at the flowers Claire had planted blooming in the early sun. Everything was still beautiful, still peaceful, still perfect. But in his head, a loop had started. From that night on, David always carried the feeling that he was about to fail. It didn't leave him. It stayed with him in moments he didn't expect. When he was sitting in his office, when he was driving home, when he lay next to Claire at night. It whispered to him in a voice he had never heard before. Next time, you might not be able to do it. Next time, she might see. Next time, everything might change. And David, the man who had always measured his worth by his ability to meet expectations, started to be afraid. Not afraid of losing Claire, but afraid that one day he would stand in front of her and no longer be the man she needed him to be. And in that fear, he realized something he had never thought of before. Maybe he had never been that man. Maybe he had just been playing that role for 13 years. And now his body, the one thing that couldn't act, had started telling the truth. David poured coffee into a mug. He heard sounds from upstairs. Claire was awake. He stood still, listening to her footsteps on the floor, the water running in the bathroom. And in his head, the question kept spinning like a broken record. Next time, will I be able to do it? Next time, will I be able to do it? Next time. The suggestion. David had been thinking about it for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since that night. 3 weeks of Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights. Nights where he did what needed to be done, and his body responded, but in his head, the fear was still there, like an animal waiting. 3 weeks of Claire's eyes, of her whispering, "I love you," after they had sex, and him wondering if she loved him or loved what he did. He had thought about how to say it. He had thought about being direct, about sitting down with Claire and saying, "I'm having a problem. I don't know why, but it's in my head all the time, and I'm scared that one day I won't be able to," but he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Won't be able to what? Won't be able to be her husband? Won't be able to be a man? Won't be able to be himself? He had also thought about hinting, letting her understand without him having to say the words, letting her see that he was trying, but something was weighing on him, and he needed her to do something, but he didn't know what. On Sunday night, the kids were asleep. Claire was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, watching something on Netflix. David sat at the other end of the couch, about an arm's length away. He had picked that spot on purpose, not so far that it looked like he was avoiding her, but far enough that he couldn't feel the warmth of her body so he could focus. He looked at her. She was wearing gray joggers and his old hoodie, a shirt he hadn't worn in a long time, but she had kept it. Her hair was in a ponytail, and there was a smudge of lipstick on the corner of her mouth. She hadn't wiped it off after putting the kids to bed. She was beautiful. She was still beautiful. And looking at her now in the comfort of a normal Sunday night, David remembered why he had loved her in the first place. Not because of Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights, but because of moments like this, when she wasn't trying, wasn't proving, wasn't testing, when she was just Claire. But those moments were getting rarer. Or was he just not seeing them anymore? "Claire," he said. She didn't take her eyes off the screen. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. She put her wine glass on the table and turned toward him, one leg tucked under her. Her eyes, blue bright, looking at him with the attention he was used to. "What's up?" she asked. David took a breath. He had thought about this sentence hundreds of times, but now, facing her, it wasn't any easier. "Listen," he said slowly, if one day I can't meet your needs, should we maybe—" He didn't get to finish. Claire sat up straight, her face changed in a second, from normal attention to something sharper, more alert. Her eyes widened, and David saw something move in them, something being calculated, predicted. "Should we what?" she asked. Her voice was still normal, but there was an edge underneath. I'm just saying, man. Should we break up? She cut him off. Should we get divorced? Is that what you're saying? David opened his mouth to explain, but Claire was already standing up. She stood in front of him, hands on her hips. And her eyes, the eyes he had seen thousands of times in gentle moments and angry moments, were now looking at him with a different light. Who is she? She asked. What? Who is she? She repeated, her voice a little higher. What's her name? David looked at her, confused. There's no one. I'm just saying, don't lie to me. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. With anger she was trying to hold back. You don't just bring up divorce for no reason. There's someone else, isn't there, at work? Who is it? Claire, is it that intern? The one you said you just work with? Or someone else? Tell me. David stood up. He didn't know what to do with his hands. They just hung at his sides like they didn't belong to him. There's no one, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. I'm just saying that if I can't… Can't what? Claire stepped closer, her face just inches from his. Can't do what? Can't have sex with me? Is that what you're saying? David was silent. And in that silence, she looked at him. Her eyes scanned his face like she was looking for a sign, proof, an admission. And David saw it, something in her eyes he had seen many times before, but never recognized until now. She was scared. Not scared of him, scared of what he had just said. But instead of asking if he was okay, instead of sitting down and talking, she did what she always did. She turned it into her own lack of appeal. His betrayal. Anything except the truth that might be right in front of her. I don't have anyone else, David said. Then why? Her voice broke and tears started running down her face. Why are you talking about divorce? What did I do wrong? Am I not enough for you? Am I not attractive enough? Claire, that's not a… I know it. She turned away, wiping her tears with her sleeve. I know you don't want me anymore. I've seen the way you look at me differently. You think I don't notice? David stood there, looking at her. And in his head, a suspicion started to form. Not suspicion of her, but of what was happening. Did she really not understand, or did she not want it to understand? Because if she understood, if she really heard what he was trying to say, she would know this wasn't about her. This was about him. About the fear inside him. About the pressure he had carried for years, now starting to crush him. But she didn't want to hear that. Because if she heard it, she would have to face a question she had been avoiding for 13 years. Did she love him? Or did she love the validation he gave her? I'm not enough, Claire said, quieter now, like she was talking to herself. I've never been enough. David stepped toward her and put his hands on her shoulders. Listen to me. There's no one else. I don't want a divorce. I'm just saying that if one day I can't… Stavanada, she turned to look at him, eyes red. Don't say that. You can. You always can. You just don't want me anymore. And David realized there was no way to win this conversation. Because whatever he said, she would hear something else. If he said he was scared he couldn't meet her needs, she would hear that he didn't want her. If he said he was under pressure, she would hear that she was a burden. If he said he needed her to listen, she would hear that he was blaming her. And in that helplessness, David felt something close inside him. A door he had been trying to keep open. I'm sorry, Tassan, he said. I shouldn't have said that. Claire wiped her tears again. She looked at him, and slowly the trembling stopped. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around his waist, and pressed her face into his chest. Don't ever talk about divorce again, she whispered. I can't live without you. David put his hand on her hair. He stood there in the living room of his house, with the woman he loved crying in his arms, and he felt a loneliness he didn't have a name for. She couldn't live without him, but could she live with him? With the real him, with his weaknesses, with the fear growing inside him? Or could she only live with the version of him she had made him into? The strong one, the one who met everything, the one who never failed. That night, Claire slept in his arms, her face still marked with dried tears. David didn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, and in his head a decision was forming. He would be direct. No hints, no suggestions, no hoping she would understand without him saying it. He would sit down with her one day soon and say, I have a problem. I need you to listen. I need you to understand this isn't about you, but I need this to change. He didn't know if she would listen. He didn't know if she would understand. But he knew that if he didn't speak, this loop would continue. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights. The fleeting looks of disappointment, the fears growing bigger, until it crushed him completely. He looked down at Claire. She was asleep, breathing softly, her hand still holding his shirt, like even in sleep she was scared he would disappear. I love you, he whispered, but she didn't hear. And David wondered, did those words even mean anything if he couldn't prove it the way she needed? He closed his eyes and, in the darkness, he started preparing for the conversation he knew was coming. A conversation he didn't know if he was brave enough to start or if she was brave enough to hear. But he knew he had to do it. Because if not, the first crack would become the last crack. The truth rejected. David waited 3 days. 3 days since that Sunday night. 3 days of Claire's looks. Watching, alert, like she was waiting for him to talk about divorce again. 3 days of heavy silence between them. Not the comfortable silence, but the silence of a room before a storm. He chose Wednesday night. Wednesday wasn't one of her nights. Maybe that would make her listen. Maybe if he said it on a day with no expectations, she would understand this wasn't about rejecting her, but about something else. The kids were asleep. Claire sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through something. She was wearing joggers and a t-shirt, her hair in a high bun. David sat in the chair across from her, not next to her. He wanted distance. "Claire," he said. She didn't look up. "I need to tell you something." She looked up, put her phone down, and David saw the alertness come back into her eyes, the look of someone ready for the worst. "I don't want a divorce," he said first. "I want to make that clear from the start." Claire didn't say anything. She just looked at him, waiting. David took a deep breath. He had thought about these words hundreds of times. He had written them in his head, edited them, rehearsed them. But now, facing her, it was still as hard as the first time. "I can't meet your needs," he said. Silence. "It's too much," he continued, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm exhausted, Claire, not just physically. I don't know how to say it. Every time we do it, I feel like I'm being tested, like I have to prove something, and I can't keep going like this." He stopped, looked at her, waited for her reaction. Claire looked at him. Then she laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a bitter, dry laugh, like he had just told the worst joke she had ever heard. She shook her head, her eyes not leaving him. "My needs?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think I'm some woman who only cares about that? You think I need it so much I'd go find someone else?" David felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm not saying you need someone else. I'm saying I can't." "You can't because you don't want to." Her voice went cold and the laugh disappeared, replaced by a hardness he had never seen. "Because you have someone else. Do you think I'm that stupid?" "There's no one else," David said, his voice rising. "I've told you 100 times. There's no one else." "Then why?" She stood up, hands on her hips, standing in front of him like a fighter, ready for battle. "Why are you talking this nonsense? Your needs are too much. Listen to yourself. Is that normal? What man tells his wife her needs are too much?" "A man who's exhausted," David said. "A man who feels like he's just a machine." "A machine?" Claire cut him off, her eyes wide. "I make you feel like a machine? What do I do to make you feel that way? Do I ever say no to you? Do I ever say no when you want to?" David looked at her. "You don't understand." "No, you don't understand." She stepped closer. "I do everything for you. I cook, I take care of the kids, I keep the house, I work, and I still try to stay beautiful for you. And now you tell me my needs are too much? You tell me I make you feel like a machine?" David stood up, and they stood facing each other in the living room, just a few feet apart, and the air between them was like a rope pulled so tight it was about to snap. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," he said, trying to stay calm. "I'm just talking about how I feel. I feel pressure. I feel like every time we do it, it's not because we want to, it's because—" "Because what?" Claire asked, her voice sharp as a knife. "Because I want you? Because I love you? Is that a bad reason?" "It's not a bad reason, but when it happens 4 times a week, every week, never changing, never a time when I can say no without you crying—" "You want to say no?" she asked, and David saw tears starting to spill from her eyes. "You want to say no to me? You don't want me anymore? Just say it, David. Don't blame my needs. Don't make me out to be the crazy one." "I'm not making you out to be— I'm the crazy one, right?" Her voice broke, but she stood straight, not backing down. "I'm the crazy wife, always demanding, never enough. I know it. I always knew you thought that. I don't think that." "You do," she yelled, and David flinched. In 13 years, she rarely yelled. "You think I'm some woman who only cares about sex. You think I have nothing else. You think I use it to control you, right? Is that what you think?" David didn't answer. And in that moment of silence, something appeared in Claire's eyes. A confirmation. She looked at him, and she saw the answer in his silence. She stepped back. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them. "I hate you," she whispered. Then she turned, walked quickly out of the living room and went upstairs. The bedroom door slammed shut. David stood alone in the living room. He heard crying from upstairs. Claire's crying, muffled, trying to hold it in but failing. He wanted to go up. He wanted to hold her, apologize, say he didn't mean it, say everything would be okay. But his feet didn't move. He stood there, staring into nothing, and a truth began to dawn on him. She couldn't accept the truth. Not because she didn't understand, but because if the truth was that he couldn't, if the truth was he was exhausted under pressure, feeling like a tool, then she would have to look at herself differently. She would have to ask, why did she need it so much? Why couldn't she hear him? Why did she always turn everything into her own lack of appeal? And that question, the question about herself, was the one Claire couldn't face. So she chose to believe he had someone else. Because if he had someone else, then the problem wasn't her. If he had someone else, then she was still okay, still enough, still the perfect wife. If he had someone else, she didn't have to change anything. David sat down on the couch. His hands were on his knees, and he looked down at them. The hands that had touched Claire thousands of times, the hands that had tried to do enough, be perfect. She can't accept the truth, he whispered, like saying it out loud would help him understand. Because if the truth is that I can't, then she would have to look at herself differently. The words hung in the air of the living room, with no one to hear them, no one to answer. Upstairs, the crying had stopped. David didn't know if Claire had fallen asleep or was just lying in the dark, like he had done so many nights before. He didn't know what face she would wake up with tomorrow, whether she would pretend nothing had happened or pick up the fight where it left off. He only knew one thing. He had told the truth. For the first time in 13 years, he had said straight out that he couldn't. And it hadn't changed anything. David sat in the living room for a long time, looking out the window at the darkness covering the garden. The streetlight outside cast pale patches of light on the floor. The house was silent. The kids were sleeping. Claire was upstairs behind a closed door, and David, for the first time, felt completely alone in this house. He looked at the watch on his wrist, the birthday gift, the Omega with the dark blue face. It was still running. It was still beautiful. It was still something he would never have bought for himself. Like this life, David thought, like this role, like everything he had tried to be. He didn't know how much longer he could keep going. But he knew that until Claire was ready to hear the truth, not the truth about another woman, not the truth about her lack of appeal, but the truth about herself, nothing would change. And David didn't know if she would ever be ready. He closed his eyes, leaned back on the couch, and let the silence of the house cover him. Upstairs, no sound. Downstairs, no one. He was in between, floating, belonging nowhere. And in his head, the question kept spinning like a broken record. She can't accept the truth. Because if the truth is that I can't, then she would have to look at herself differently. But if she never looks at herself, what do I do? He had no answer. Just silence and darkness and the watch on his wrist still ticking. The Cold War, a new perspective. The Cold War started without any announcement. No clear boundaries, no ultimatums. Just a new silence. A distance created that no one acknowledged. Claire still made dinner. Still asked about his work. Still reminded Ethan to do his homework. Still took Mia to piano class on Tuesday afternoons. Everything ran like a well-oiled machine. But there were differences. David started noticing them on the third day after the fight. He came home from work, went to the kitchen to get water, and Claire was standing in front of the fridge, wearing athletic shorts and a tank top. Before, she wouldn't have worn that when he was home. She would have worn it, but there would have been a look, a glance, something to make sure he was looking. Now she didn't look at him. She took out a bottle of water, closed the fridge, and walked past him like he was part of the furniture. David stood there, water bottle in hand, watching her. That was when he noticed the first difference. In the days that followed, he noticed more. Claire didn't make those unconscious, seductive gestures anymore. No more hand on his chest when she walked by, no more sitting on his lap on the couch, no more changing in front of him with the bedroom door open. She was still attentive. Dinner was still hot. The fridge was still full. The kids' schedules were still managed. But she no longer showed off her body in front of him. And that confused David. Not because he wanted her to do those things, but because it made him see everything from a new angle. One evening, while he was sitting in the living room and Claire was in the kitchen, David watched her through the open doorway. She was wearing a baggy t-shirt and joggers, her hair in a high bun. No makeup. She was wiping the counter, a simple movement. No performance at all. And in David's head, a question started to form. If she really had such a high need, how could she stop so easily? 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since the last time they had sex. 2 weeks without Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights. No questions about attraction, no searching looks. And Claire was fine. She still went to work, still took care of the kids, still lived her life. Like that need had never existed. David sat on the couch, trying to remember the years before. Had Claire ever wanted him just because she wanted him? Not because of some other reason? He thought back to nights after fights, nights after he came back from a trip, nights after she was jealous. There was always an event, a trigger, something that started it. And now, with no event, during this Cold War, after he had made it clear he couldn't, she didn't have that need anymore. Or did she still have it, but was hiding it? David didn't know, but a thought began to settle in his mind, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. Maybe that need wasn't a need. Maybe it was a tool, a weapon, a way to control. He looked at Claire through the kitchen doorway. She was still wiping the counter, not looking toward him. Her face was calm, not happy or sad. And David realized that in the past 2 weeks, he hadn't seen her cry once. She had cried a lot during that fight. But after that, not a single tear. She had withdrawn. Not from the marriage, she was still here, still doing her part. She had withdrawn from something else, her main weapon, sexual appeal. She had used it to keep him, to test him, to prove that he still loved her, still wanted her, still wasn't going anywhere. And now that he said he couldn't meet it, she wasn't trying to prove that he could. She didn't increase her seduction. She didn't challenge him more. She took it away. Like she was saying, "You don't want it? Fine, then you don't get it." David sat on the couch for a long time, staring into nothing. And a strange clarity began to creep into him. The pain was still there. The pain of a marriage falling apart. The pain of words unspoken. The pain of seeing someone he loved become a stranger. But next to the pain, there was clarity. He started to see more clearly. Not see Claire clearly, he still didn't know what she was thinking, what she was feeling. But he saw the pattern clearly. He saw what had been happening for 13 years. What he hadn't seen because he was too busy meeting, too busy proving, too busy becoming the man she needed. And now that he couldn't, she didn't need him in any other way. She just took away her weapon and waited. For what? David didn't know. For him to come back? For him to apologize? For him to say he was wrong, that he would do everything like before? Or for him to disappear? That night, David lay in bed, a measurable distance from Claire. She was on her side, her back to him, breathing evenly. He didn't know if she was asleep or not. He looked at her silhouette in the dark, and a decision began to form in his mind. A test. He wouldn't do anything. He wouldn't try to fix things. He wouldn't apologize for what he said. He wouldn't try to have sex with her. He would just watch. See if she came to him. See if she needed him. See if her need actually existed when it wasn't a tool anymore. This wasn't a game. David didn't want to play games. He just wanted to know the truth. He wanted to know, did Claire want him? Or did she only want the validation he gave her? And if she didn't want him, if all those years were just a loop of testing and proving, then who had he been living with? Who had he loved? Who had he been trying to be a man for? David looked at Claire for another moment. She didn't move. Her breathing was still steady. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe she was awake like he had been so many nights before, lying still and thinking about things that couldn't be said. He closed his eyes. In his head, a voice, the voice of this new clarity, cold and clear, started asking questions. Not about Claire, about him. What had he been doing for 13 years? He had loved her. That was true, but alongside the love, had he been trying to prove something too? Had he been using his ability to meet her needs to show that he was good enough, man enough, worthy enough? And if so, was he any different from her? They had both been using this to prove something. They had both been scared of the same thing. Not being enough. Not attractive enough. Not man enough. Not enough to be loved. David opened his eyes. In the darkness, he looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, he didn't see Claire in his question. He saw himself. He had been using this to prove something too. And now that he couldn't prove it anymore, he didn't know who he was. The next day, David woke up before Claire. He went downstairs to make coffee, and when his first cup was full, he stood looking out the window. The garden was still green. The flowers Claire had planted were still blooming. The morning sun was still golden. Everything was still beautiful. But David didn't see it the same way anymore. He heard sounds from upstairs. Claire was awake. He poured another cup of coffee and put it on the table across from where he sat. A normal gesture, something he did every day. When Claire came down, she looked at the coffee, looked at him, then sat down. "Thanks," she said. "No problem." They sat across from each other, drinking coffee in silence. No touches, no long looks. Just two people sitting in the same kitchen, drinking the same coffee, with more distance between them than ever before. David looked at her. She was beautiful. She was still beautiful. But he no longer looked at her with the eyes of a man trying to prove something. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who was beginning to understand. And in his head, the test had begun. He would do nothing. He would wait. He wanted to see. When there was no weapon, when there was no test, when there was no pressure to prove. Did she still want him? And if the answer was no, then he would have to face the final question. Did he want to stay in a marriage where love only existed when it was proven through something that was never enough? Claire put her coffee mug down, stood up, and started making breakfast for the kids. She didn't look at him. She didn't say anything more. David sat there, his hand still around his coffee mug, and in his head a new loop began. Not the loop of fear, not the loop of pressure. The loop of a question he didn't know if he was brave enough to find the answer to. The test. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of not touching each other. 3 weeks of silent dinners. Of lying next to each other without talking. Of drinking coffee across from each other like strangers. David had done his test. Do nothing. See if Claire would come to him. She didn't come. And in those 3 weeks, David saw what he needed to see. Not because she didn't want him, but because she was punishing him the only way she knew how. By taking away what she thought was most important. But tonight, David decided to end the test. He didn't want to prove anything anymore, and he didn't want to know if she would come, if she needed him, if she loved him the way he needed to be loved. He just wanted to hold his wife. Claire was lying in bed, her back to him. The nightlight was off. The room was dark. David lay still for a moment, listening to her breathing, uneven, not the breathing of someone asleep. She was awake. She was always awake when he was awake these past 3 weeks. He turned toward her, moving slowly so she had time to react if she didn't want this. His hand went to her waist, over her nightgown. She didn't move. David pressed his chest against her back, feeling the warmth of her body. It had been 3 weeks since he last felt this. He leaned down, his lips touching her neck, where her skin was soft and warm, where before it had always made her shiver. He kissed her. A light kiss, not asking for anything, not meaning to lead to anything else. Just a touch, a way of saying he was still here. He still wanted her, but not the way she thought. And in that moment, David felt her body stiffen. Not stiff with desire, stiff with resistance, with a wall she had put up. Claire's hand came up, grabbed his wrist, and pushed his hand away from her. Don't, she said. Her voice was dry, like she hadn't talked to anyone all day. You said you didn't want to. David didn't pull his hand back. He left it there, between her back and the air. Not moving forward, not moving back. Do you want to? He whispered. Silence. Claire didn't answer. She didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She just lay there, her back to him, her hand still holding his wrist but not pushing harder. And David felt it. Her body was trembling. Not from cold. The room was warm. It was the trembling of a body trying to hold something in. David knew this trembling. He had felt it hundreds of times in the moments before they had sex, when her body started responding to his touch. She wanted him. Her body couldn't hide that. But she was still silent. She didn't turn around. She didn't let go of his hand, but she didn't pull him closer either. She was caught between two things, desire and punishment. David looked at her silhouette in the dark. He saw the tension in her shoulders, saw her hand gripping his wrist so hard her fingers were white. She was hurting, not physical pain. The pain of having to refuse what her body wanted. The pain of keeping distance from the person she loved. The pain of a reason she probably didn't even fully understand. And in that moment, David understood. It wasn't that she needed it so much. It was that she needed him to prove he wanted her. All these years, he had thought it was physical need. He thought she had a higher drive than normal, that she needed sex more than other women. He had measured it by frequency, by schedule, by Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights. But now watching her lie there, her body trembling with desire while she still tried to push him away, David saw clearly. If it was just physical need, she couldn't have gone 3 weeks. The body would win. Desire would win. But she was still here. Still holding strong, still refusing. Because it wasn't need. It was a test. And she was failing her own test. David pulled his hand back. He didn't push. He didn't try to convince her with his touch. Didn't try to melt her resistance with kisses. He just lay down, pressed his chest against her back, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. Claire didn't push him away. She didn't turn around either. She just lay there in his arms, and David felt her trembling hadn't stopped. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice so soft it was almost silent. I got it wrong. She didn't answer. But David felt her breathing change, faster, shallower, like she was trying to stay calm. It's not that you need it so much, he said. It's that you need me to prove I want you, right? The silence stretched. David thought maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe she would stay silent, keep the distance, keep punishing them both. Then she spoke. You don't want me, she whispered. Her voice wasn't angry. It was sad, a deep sadness David had never heard before. You say you want me, but you don't act like it. You say no to me. You tell me my needs are too much. You think I'm crazy. I don't think you're... Quiet, she said, not loud but firm. Let me talk. David went silent. Claire took a long breath like she was gathering courage. I know I have problems. I know I get jealous for no reason. I know I exhaust you. But I don't know any other way. This is the only way I know. And when you told me it was too much, I didn't know what to do. So I did the only thing I knew. I took it away to see if you needed it. David tightened his arms around her a little more. I need you, not that. Then what do you need? Her voice broke. What do you need me to do? How do you need me? Because I don't know. This is all I know. And if this isn't good enough, I don't know what I have left. The words fell into the darkness, heavy. David heard them, and for the first time, he didn't see Claire as the strong, capable woman who always knew what she wanted. He saw a scared little girl, trying to hold on to the only thing she thought could keep the man she loved. I don't know, David said honestly. I'm trying to figure it out too. But I know I need you. I need to hold you without feeling pressure. I need to be able to say no without making you cry. I need to be loved in a way that doesn't always have to be proven. Claire didn't answer, but David felt her body start to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased little by little. Her breathing slowed. I'm scared, she whispered after a long silence. I'm scared that if I don't do it, you'll go find someone else. I'm scared you'll see I'm not enough. I'm scared. She didn't finish, but David understood. She was scared of losing him. Not scared of losing the man who met her needs. Scared of losing him. His person, his presence, the life they had built together. And that fear was so big she had used the only thing she thought could keep him. I'm not going anywhere, David said. I'm here. She turned around for the first time in 3 weeks, facing him in the dark. David couldn't see her face clearly, but he felt her breath on his face, and he knew she was crying. Do you love me? She asked, her voice shaking. Yes. Even with my problems? Yes. Even when I don't know any other way? Yes. Claire wrapped her arms around his neck, pressed her face into his chest, and cried. Not the sobbing cries of their earlier fights. This was the crying of someone who had held everything in too long and was finally allowed to let go. David held her, didn't say anything more. He just held her, let her cry in his arms, and in the darkness of the room, he felt something change. Not everything was solved. There was still a lot to talk about, to understand, to change. But at least they had started speaking the right language. Not the language of tests, but the language of fear. And David, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel alone in that fear. The confession. 4 days after that night, Claire said, I need to talk to you. It was a Saturday morning. The kids were at the neighbor's house playing, and the house was so quiet. David could hear the ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen. Claire sat on the couch, legs curled up, hugging a pillow. She was looking out the window, not at him. David sat in the chair across from her. He didn't sit next to her. He wanted her to have space, but he sat close enough for her to know he was there. Claire didn't speak right away. She looked out at the garden where the morning sun was coming through the trees. David saw her hands gripping the pillow, her knuckles white. She was gathering courage. I'm scared, she said, her voice so small it was almost a whisper. I'm scared you'll stop loving me. I'm scared I'm not enough, so I always wanted you, to see if you still wanted me. She stopped, like those words had taken all her strength. I know it's crazy, she continued, her voice trembling. I know. Every time I did it, part of me hated myself. But I didn't know any other way. This was the only way I knew. David looked at her. She still wasn't looking at him, but he saw her shoulders shaking. She was crying, but not like before. No sobbing, just silent tears. When you said you couldn't, she said, I heard, you don't want me. That's all I heard. And I did the stupidest thing. I thought if there was someone else, at least it wouldn't be my fault. I know it doesn't make sense, but in my head at that moment, it did. David sat still. He wanted to go to her, wanted to hold her, but he knew she needed to say all this before he did anything else. Do you know what I thought about for 3 weeks? Claire asked, her voice breaking. I thought you would leave. I thought you would find someone else. I thought you would realize I wasn't worth it. And I prepared for it. I told myself, If he goes, at least I saw it coming. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were red, tears still falling, and David saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Not defiance, not control. Surrender. "But you stayed," she whispered. "You held me. You said you were sorry. You said you got it wrong, and I didn't understand. I didn't understand why you stayed when I took away the only thing I thought you needed." David looked at her, and in that moment, he saw that her question wasn't about him. It was about herself, about her worth, about whether she was worth staying for. And he realized she was doing the same thing he was. They both measured their worth by their ability to meet the other's expectations. They were both scared of not being enough. They both used the only thing they knew to prove they were worthy of being loved. David stood up. He went to her, sat down next to her on the couch. He didn't hold her right away. He sat next to her, shoulder to shoulder, so she could feel his presence. "I'm scared too," he said. Claire turned to look at him. "I'm scared I can't make you happy," he said, his voice slow, like he was also gathering courage. "I'm scared you'll find someone else. I'm scared that if I'm not enough, you'll look at me with eyes I can't handle. So I made myself a failure before I could fail." He stopped, looking down at his hands. "I thought if I said it first, that I couldn't, that it was too much, then at least I controlled the ending. I wouldn't have to wait for you to leave. I left first." Claire looked at him, her eyes still wet, but something changed in the way she looked. Like she was seeing him for the first time. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "Me neither." They looked at each other, and in that silence, David felt something melting. Not between them, but inside him. A wall he had built a long time ago. The wall of having to prove himself, of being enough, of never being allowed to fail. "I don't need you to prove anything," Claire said, her voice softer but clearer. "I just need you to stay." David looked at her. He saw her face. Not the face of a woman testing him, not the face of a woman punishing him. He saw the face of the woman he had loved for 13 years. The woman who was also scared, also trying, also looking for a way to be loved. He opened his arms. Claire didn't hesitate. She pressed into him, her face buried in his neck, her hands gripping his shirt like he was the only thing keeping her together. And David held her, not holding to lead to something else. Not holding because he wanted her, or she wanted him, or they needed to prove anything, just holding. Holding because they hadn't held each other in a long time. Holding because they had just said things they had never dared to say. Holding because they were still here, together after everything. David felt the warmth of her body, her heartbeat through her shirt, her hot breath on his neck. She was crying, but not crying in pain. Crying with relief, crying because she had finally said it, crying because he had stayed. He put his hand on her hair, stroked it gently, said nothing. He didn't need to speak. They had both said the most important things. They sat on the couch for a long time, holding each other in the morning light. Outside, the traffic started to thin out. Birds sang from the garden. The house was quiet, but not the quiet of a Cold War. It was the quiet of two people who had found each other after a storm. David closed his eyes, feeling Claire's weight in his arms. She was lighter than he remembered. Or maybe he had forgotten what it felt like to hold her without any expectations. "I love you," he whispered. Claire didn't answer with words. She just held him tighter, like she was saying she loved him too, that she had never stopped loving him, that everything she did was because she was scared of losing him. And David understood. He understood that their love had never been the problem. The problem was fear. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being abandoned. The fear that if they didn't prove it, they wouldn't be worthy of being loved. But now, sitting on the couch with Claire in his arms, David felt that fear start to shrink. It didn't disappear completely. It was still there, part of them. Maybe always would be. But it wasn't the only thing anymore. Next to it, there was something else. Connection. Truth. And a feeling David hadn't felt in a very long time. Safety. Claire looked up at him. Her eyes were still red, but the tears were gone. She looked at him with eyes he had never seen before. Not the eyes of a woman testing him. Not the eyes of a woman waiting for him to prove something. They were the eyes of someone who had just been seen. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm still scared." "I know, but I want to try. Try not to do that. Try to just stay." David put his hand on her cheek, his thumb wiping away a leftover tear. "I want to try too." Claire pressed her face into his palm, closed her eyes. And David sat there, his hand on her cheek, her in his arms. And for the first time in many years, he didn't feel like he needed to do anything more. No need to prove. No need to meet expectations. No need to be anyone but himself. They sat on the couch until the kids came home. Ethan and Mia ran into the house laughing, with dirty shoes, and David let go to go clean the floor. Claire stood up, smiled at him, a small smile, but real. "I'll make lunch," she said. "I'll help." They went into the kitchen together like they had done 1,000 times before. But this time, when David stood by the sink and Claire stood next to him, she put her hand on his back. A light touch, not asking for anything. And David felt the difference. Not because it would lead to something, but because it didn't need to lead to anything. It was just a touch. And that right now was enough. The beginning. 4 months later, David no longer counted Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday nights. That schedule was long dead, and he couldn't remember exactly when it died. Maybe that night Claire cried in his arms, maybe in the weeks after when they learned to talk without fear. Maybe gradually, like something withering, because it was no longer being watered. Now there were no more tests, no more questions about attraction disguised as desire, no more searching looks after every conversation with another woman. Claire still got jealous. She had told him that maybe she would always be a little jealous because it was part of her. But now she said it. She said, "I'm jealous, but I know it doesn't make sense." And David no longer felt like he was being owned. He just saw a woman trying. As for him, he had learned that saying no didn't collapse the world. Claire was still there. She didn't cry. She didn't ask if he still found her attractive. She just said okay and went back to watching Netflix. And David sat next to her, feeling a relief so strange it was almost painful. They still had sex, but now it was different. Not 4 times a week, not a hidden schedule, not a test. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes not at all, sometimes 3 times in 1 week, and then 10 days of nothing. And David realized this is what normal might look like. No pattern, just 2 people, sometimes wanting each other, sometimes not. Tonight was a normal night. The kids had been asleep for a while. David lay in bed, propped up against the headboard, reading a novel Ethan had recommended. Something about space, about spaceships and loneliness. He wasn't sure he understood all of it, but he liked how it made him think about things far away, things unrelated to this house, this job, this marriage. Next to him, Claire lay on her side, propped on one elbow, her phone in her other hand, reading something. She was wearing his old t-shirt, a college shirt, faded after years. Her hair was spread on the pillow, and there was a faint smear of face cream on her cheek. David looked at her, and in his head there were no questions. No calculations, no fear about tomorrow night or last night. Just her here with him on a normal Tuesday night, a Tuesday night that no longer meant anything except being Tuesday. Claire put her phone down. She turned toward him, and David felt the shift in the air. Not the tension of before, just her body moving on the mattress. She put her hand on his chest. Not a demanding touch, not a calculated touch, just her hand there on his chest, feeling his heartbeat through his shirt. "Do you want to?" she asked. Her voice was normal. No expectation in it, no edge. It was like when she asked if he wanted more coffee or if he wanted to watch a movie. A question, not a test. David looked at her. He looked at her eyes. Blue, bright, no searching, no fear of rejection hiding behind them. She was just asking. And he could say yes, he could say no. Either answer would be okay. He thought about his body, not about what it had to do, not about what it should do, not about what it needed to prove. Just whether he wanted to. "I just want to hold you tonight," he said. "Is that okay?" He felt her hand on his chest, not pulling back, not stopping. She looked at him, and a smile appeared on her face. Not the smile of hidden disappointment, not the smile of reluctant acceptance. A real smile, gentle, like the nightlight in the room. "Okay," she said. She curled into him, her head on his shoulder, her hand still on his chest. David put his arm around her, pulled her closer, felt the warmth of her body, the smell of her lavender shampoo, her steady breathing. They lay like that in silence. David's book had fallen to the floor sometime, but he didn't pick it up. Claire's phone was dark on the edge of the bed. "Do you remember," Claire said, her voice dreamy, "when we were first married, you told me you were scared I would think you weren't enough?" David remembered. It was a night on their honeymoon, lying in a hotel bed in Cancun, and he had said a fear he had never told anyone. "I remember I laughed," Claire said. "I laughed because I thought you were joking. I couldn't believe a man like you could think he wasn't enough." "What did you say?" "I told you that you were the most perfect man I'd ever met. And I meant it. But now I understand. You didn't think you were enough because you weren't. It was because I made you feel that way." David tightened his arms around her. "It's not your fault. It's not yours either," Claire said. "It's just, we were both scared, and we turned that fear into a loop. You were scared of not being enough, so you tried too hard. I was scared of losing you, so I tested you too much. And that loop kept spinning. Until it broke," David then added. "Until it broke," she repeated. They were quiet for a moment. David heard the air conditioner blowing, branches lightly touching the window. Claire's heartbeat through her chest. Do you ever think, Claire asked, her voice even softer, that we might never be perfectly compatible? That you might want more than me, or I might want more than you, and we'll always have to adjust? David looked at the ceiling. He had thought about that many times. In sleepless nights, in days sitting in his office, looking out the window, in moments when he wondered if he could keep going like this. Yes, he said, I've thought about it. And what do you think? David turned to look at her. In the nightlight, her face was soft, her eyes looking at him intently. And he saw no fear in them. Just curiosity, just a real question. I think we might never be perfectly compatible, he said. And I think that's okay. Claire didn't say anything, but her hand on his chest squeezed lightly. Because I've learned, David said, that we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be real. And I think we're learning how to be real. Claire looked up at him, and David saw her eyes brighten, not with tears, but with another kind of light. The light of relief, the light of truth. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm still scared. I know, but I'm not as scared as I was before. David leaned down and kissed her forehead. A light kiss, not asking, not leading, just a kiss. They lay back in silence. Claire's phone lit up with a message, maybe from her mom, maybe from the school group chat, but she didn't look at it. David's book was still on the floor, open to page 47, but he didn't pick it up. Outside, a car drove by, headlights flashing across the curtain and then disappearing. And in that quiet room, David felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the peace of an ending, but the peace of a beginning. A beginning with no plan, no promise of perfection, no guarantee that things would be easy. Just the peace of finally stopping the race. Claire sighed, a soft sigh, and David felt her body relax in his arms. She was falling asleep, or nearly asleep. He looked at the watch on his wrist, the Omega with the dark blue face, the birthday gift from a year ago. It was still running, it was still beautiful, but now, when he looked at it, he didn't see pressure, he just saw a watch. He turned off the nightlight. In the dark, Claire shifted in his arms, pressing her face into his chest, and David heard her voice, sleepy, almost silent. Do you know what I like most now? What? Being held by you, not because it leads to anything, just being held. David tightened his arms around her. I like that too. They lay like that, in the dark, not saying anything more. No unanswered questions, no tests waiting, no fear of tomorrow. Outside, it started to rain. The first drops pattered on the roof, then became a soft, steady rain, like the heartbeat of something bigger. And David realized that, for the first time in his life, he didn't need to prove anything. Not to Claire, not to himself, not that he was man enough, husband enough, person enough. He just needed to stay, and so did she. They still didn't know what the future held. Whether they would ever be perfectly compatible, whether the old fears would come back, whether one day one of them would fall back into the spiral of proving and testing. But for the first time, they didn't dwell on that question, because they had learned love is not a test. Love is just staying, and staying together on a normal Tuesday night with rain falling outside and the kids asleep and no one needing to prove anything. That right now was enough. David closed his eyes, feeling Claire's warmth in his arms, her steady breathing, the quiet of the house. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if they would make it. He didn't know if the old cracks would heal completely or one day open again. But he knew one thing. Tonight, they were here, together. No more war, no more tests. Just the beginning of something new. And that was enough.